welcome to today's show. This is Office Hours, episode number 20, big 2-0. Office Hours is almost old enough to drink, if weeks were years. In an alternate universe, where weeks are years. This is episode 20, either way, whatever universe you're living in. And what is Office Hours? What even are we doing here? What's going on? This is a GM advice show. It's a GM advice show. You go to my website, www.adam-koebel.com. You click the Office Hours link, you fill out the form. The form, through the magic of the internet, sends your questions to me. Then, using the powers of literacy, I read them, and on the show, I respond. Pretty simple, right? Fairly straightforward. Easy to do. You can do it too. Go get involved. If you have a question, go to the website, fill it out, do the thing. Today, we have 3 questions, like we usually do. These ones are about, well, they're a bunch of stuff. This is a bit of a grab bag. 2 of them are about player types. One of them is about a more general conundrum. I grabbed these ones because today I feel like talking about passion. That's right. Today I feel like talking about passion. And these all, in some way or another, involve people's passion for role-playing games, a desire to do a thing in a game, to play a game a certain way, to play a certain kind of game, and engaging with that desire as a game master, as a player, and the ways that that can happen for us as players at the table. So we're going to start with a familiar voice. If you've been around the Math Squad for a while, you'll recognize this this lovely voice.
Hi Adam, Primarch the Mage here. One of the players in my weekly game has a passive character. He rarely does anything without specific prompting, and I don't know how to engage him. This player is enjoying himself in the game, but, as a GM, I don't enjoy engaging his character, or putting them in the spotlight, simply because tense moments often fall flat. I have asked some leading questions in order to flesh out his character, and the results were okay, but I don't think they solved the core issue. In fact, I'm not even sure there is a core issue. Is this just a separation of social expectations? He's the only one in the group that's like this. In short, as a GM, how do I engage a character that I find to be uninteresting or flat, in a way that is enjoyable for everyone involved? Thank you.
Primarch the Mage, everybody, showing some actually really solid self-awareness, right? Like, first of all, okay, this kind of stuff can be so frustrating as a GM, right? You're trying to build this riveting narrative. You're trying to provide hooks for the players to bite onto via your setting or the situation you've created or your NPCs. And when a player won't bite, it can be totally vexing when you're like, yeah, but here's a cool thing for you to get involved in. And they're like, I'm gonna swim on by. That can drive you nuts. The most basic example of this is the player or players who ignore the prep that you've done, right? This happens in D&D, OSR games, any game where you're forced to do a bunch of prep in advance, when the players are like, fuck this dungeon, fuck all your dungeons. I'm going to just go into town and do a different thing that I think is interesting. But in this case, what Primarch is saying is that there's a player who just is not engaging with the kind of game that it seems like Primarch and his players are playing. And what I think the key phrase here, and I love this, I really, really love this. So the key phrase in Primarch's question, and I think something that he did a lot of work for me, because otherwise I'd have to dig into this, I'm going to try to untangle this little mess starting here, is the player is enjoying himself in the game. Because I think that's where the key to all this stuff is, right? Primarch isn't saying the player's not having fun. Primarch is saying the player is having a different kind of fun from me. And in fact, maybe this isn't an issue at all. Maybe I'm just being a jerk. I mean, Primarch didn't say that, but Primarch seems worried about the fact that maybe there's no problem. Maybe he shouldn't be pushing, which is really great. I think being willing to question our own desires as game masters, our desire to have our prep met, our desire to have our hooks bitten. There's no reason to get angry at the fish for not biting the hook, right? The fish is just not interested in the bait you've got. So let's talk about what this might be about, where some of these issues might come from. So we're often, as GMs, tasked by the rules of the game, like straight up by the rules of the book. I think the last time I saw this happen was in Tenra Bunch of Zero, and this well, this annoys me to no end. We're tasked with the responsibility of delivering fun to everyone at the table, right? It's our job to make sure everyone is having fun. And games say this to us. They're lying. They're lying to you. If your game says that you, as the GM, are responsible for everyone's fun, you can give this to your game, and then you can throw that part out the window. Get a big black Sharpie and just cross that out, because you're not, right? The GM's job in these role-playing games often includes making sure that everyone has a good time, which is so weird to me, because why is that our job? Why are we responsible for everyone's fun? Why is it not everybody's job to make sure they all have fun together? Why are players not responsible for their own fun? Why do we even talk about generating fun as if it's a thing that we can make and not a byproduct of the game? Right? Fun is an after effect. Fun is a ripple. Fun is the nuclear fallout after the explosion of the game. This kind of mindset can lead you to a situation where the GM is either inherently failing at that job. The game says do this and you don't do it, you're failing, because you're not looking out for everyone's fun equally, or because you're, looking out for yourself, making sure you're having fun. And what the problem here is that Primarch's running into an issue where his fun priorities, his fun desires, his need for gratification as a game master is not being met by this other player. And the game that he might be playing, depending on how shitty it's written, the game might be telling him, Primarch, buddy, you're fucking it up. You're not making sure everyone's having fun. Worse than that, you can be led to a situation where the GM is doing their job almost all the way, and everybody at the table is having fun, except the GM is miserable, right? This kind of martyrdom-focused GMing is very definitely a thing. You play the game your players want to play, even though you hate it because none of them will GM, or you get stuck GMing games because nobody else will, and they end up complaining to their friends about how their GM isn't having any fun. And you're complaining to your friends and other gamers and other GMs on the internet about how miserable you are, and we all commiserate, and pretty soon there's this myth that GMs are all these long-suffering bastards forced to GM who wish they could just, have it easy, like their players, and not have to GM, right? Raise your hand if you've ever felt that way, right? If you're the long-suffering GM, if you're the guy or the girl or the non-binary person who is playing a role-playing game in the seat of the game master or the dungeon master or the hollyhock god, and you're the one suffering through this stuff. It sucks. It really sucks. Because sometimes you just want to play a game and no one else will GM, those bastards. So yeah, it happens. And I'm not saying Primarch is doing this, right? Like this question wasn't Primarch complaining. This wasn't, oh, woe is me, this is hard. I just wanted to highlight the idea that there's emotional work being done here, and that the main conflict isn't about the rules or the game that Primarch is playing necessarily, though that game might be encouraging certain shitty behaviors in the whole group, but that Primarch's main conflict is about the enjoyment level of two of the players at the table, which is to say, this person in question and Primarch himself. And so the real question I think being asked is, I think, how can I manage the fact that a player in my game is having a kind of fun that doesn't really mesh with my own? Or the side order of, I feel underappreciated when my efforts as a GM go unnoticed or unresponded to. And both of those are super real. It's really tough when you spend time and energy, either during your prep beforehand or live at the table, to give your players something that you expect or hope at least will entertain and excite them. Something you hope will prompt an energetic, creative response. You put an NPC in front of them that you just know is going to tweak all of their characters' backstory, and you've watched them play and watched the way their character behaves, and you're like, I'm ready, I've got this NPC just for you, I made this for you, and you hold it out to them, and they're like, cool, I guess. Or they shoot the NPC, right? You're not getting the response that you had hoped for, and that's disappointing. And disappointment is really disillusioning. We don't like feeling disappointed, especially as the GM, especially as someone who put all this time and energy into prep, we can feel really bad when players just, I care not for your creative endeavor. Or they can tell us to fuck off, basically, in not so many words. And creative disappointment can be disillusioning. It can make us not want to GM. We pour a ton of ourselves into the things that we love, and we want people to engage with those things because our NPCs matter, our encounters are lovingly crafted, and our improvisation is smart and fun, and we're good GMs, and goddammit, just love us. But the thing is, no matter how much we'd like these things to be universal, no matter how much we'd like to think of ourselves as mind readers for our players, crafting perfect things for them, A, not everyone responds the same way to games or the things we put into them, and B, taste is not an objective factor, and we may have to do some work aligning our group and our game and everyone's play styles together. And also keep in mind that the things that you prep matter to you because you spent time and energy on them, but they matter not at all to the people playing your game. I liken this a little bit to imagine the GM is a 5-year-old child, and this 5-year-old goes to kindergarten, and they're given a piece of construction paper and some glue and some macaroni and some smelly markers, and they draw what they believe to be a beautiful picture, a macaroni castle. They are the fucking Van Gogh of macaroni and smelly markers. So they make this thing, and they bring it home to their parents, and they show it to them. They turn it over to them, and they say, "Look, mother, look, father, look, parent, I've created this masterwork for you." And they've put in hours and hours of time in their mind. They're kids, it probably took them 10 minutes, but they put in all this energy, and they've turned over this work of art, and the parent has nothing to go on except the thing itself with no context and their love for this child. So they look at it and they're like, cool macaroni, kid. But they're like, oh, I love you. This is great because you made it. And we can't get by on unconditional parental love, right? As GMs. We can't expect that our players will simply love us because we put in the effort to do a thing. It's not about that. The thought is not what counts. I'm sorry. In game mastering, the thought is not what counts. The results are what count. And the results may not be universal. What you think is interesting as a GM, what the other players at the table might think is interesting, you may have a player who's like, no, I don't give a shit about this. I'm sorry, this is not engaging to me. Again, I'm not saying, Primarch, you're a bad GM. I'm just saying that it sounds like your player, this particular player, is in some respects or another the proverbial sore thumb, in that the rest of your group is enjoying your macaroni drawings, right? The rest of your group likes your smelly markers. But this player is not buying in. They're not taking the bait. They're not driving the narrative in a way that fits your game style the way everybody else is. And at the risk of having you watching this and rolling your eyes and saying to your screen, well, no shit, Adam, of course, I'm going to ask you something obvious. And it should be obvious to you, because I feel like you're probably at the point where you're a good enough GM that this would be the first thing that you would do before even coming to me and asking this question. Have you tried talking to this person? I know you have. Have you asked them what this game is about for them? What about it is fun? Have you asked if they've been having a good time? Have you pointed out this perceived problem? And have you asked them, hey, have you noticed how you're a bit different from the other people playing this role-playing game? I think you probably have. But if not, or if you're not Primarch and you're watching this and you have a similar problem, start there, right? Talk to the player, ask them what they're enjoying about the game, discuss the space between your desire and theirs, and figure out a way you can both enjoy the game, right? Now this is me, John Harper GMing. This is me saying, imagine a solution, and then it's a solution. It's about obviously more than that. The figuring out a way is difficult, and that's a whole other thing, but definitely make sure that you've talked to this person so that you at least understand where they're coming from. But keep in mind though, that conversation might go nowhere. Primarch's conversation very well might have gone nowhere. Other folks play games differently maybe than we do. And when I say we, I mean people who are analytical about their games, who think about things like ludonarrative dissonance, people who attend call-in game mastering advice shows on Twitch or YouTube. other people just play. They're just playing the game to play the game. And when you ask them what they're thinking or feeling, they might just be like, bah, I don't know, I'm just playing a game. I'm just playing a game. We got sword, got magic styles, spell, I kill monster. Wait, I don't know, it's fun. That's infuriating. It's so infuriating. But honestly, there's nothing you can do about that. Except, like a good GM, provide prompts for conversation, ask specific questions, nudge people along, right? Like, GMing is a conversational skill. So use some of those skills in that conversation. But what it really comes down to, though, if your player is having fun, and it's a different kind of fun than the rest of everybody's fun, and everybody else's fun is being negatively impacted by this player's fun, you have to make a decision. You got to make the hard choice. And it's either you or your group or everyone together. You don't have to make this choice alone because the GM is not the sole arbiter of this bullshit. You can either adapt the game's playstyle to that player, right? Focus all the good creative shit on the other players and their characters. Let this player be a sidekick. Let them follow along. And just don't worry about it, right? Don't bait the hook for them so hard. Just give them the boring shit to play with. Give them the things that they enjoy. And focus on your big dramaturge players for the serious dramatic moments. As long as this player isn't, making fart jokes in the middle of a soliloquy, you're probably going to be okay. Let go of your desire to immerse them in the beautiful narrative soup of your GMing. This, to me, feels like the most obvious answer. Like, just listen to them. And if they're telling you they're having fun, maybe like you suspect, Primarch, this isn't really a problem and you just kind of need to get over yourself. And I don't mean that in like a judgmental way. Everybody needs to get over themselves. It happens all the time. Maybe it's okay to just let go. You have a whole rest of the group that's doing the things that you want to do, and they're all working together on that. However, your other option is to just not play with this person, right? And I know, gosh, this is hard, but if you and your other players are finding it frustrating and disruptive and not just kind of this person being a background sidekick, and you just legitimately want a group where everyone's going to engage directly, you can talk about it together at the table after a session or before and point out that, like, maybe you're not fitting in. Maybe that's just not a good fit for you anymore. And God, I know breaking up is hard to do. It's so hard to tell a person you don't want to see them anymore. But if it's fucking up your Christmas, don't play with that person, right? Like, there's plenty of other player fish in the player sea, and maybe Johnny Disengagement over here just needs to go find some other group more suited to their tastes. And I guess there's an alternate third option, and this is sort of the bucket of cold water approach, but you can play a game that forces this player to engage, and force is dangerous when used in role-playing games. We're going to talk a little bit about this, but something GM-less, something shared narrative, responsibility-focused in a broad sense, Microscope or Fall of Magic or whatever. Make sure you clearly lay out everybody's responsibilities and get consent and buy-in before you're all like, okay, Johnny, now it's your turn. Say something creative, because that might be shitty for that person. But this also might be the kick in the pants that this person needs. Just make sure you get consent first. Don't just be like, we're going to play a role-playing game. Don't prepare them and be like, bam, dude, you're the GM now. Make up some shit. All right, Johnny, let's go. What I'm seeing here is a failure to align desire, right? A failure to align what Primarch the Mage wants, what Primarch's aligned players want, and this poor one sore thumb player, right? Johnny Disengagement deserves to play the game that he wants to play. And maybe y'all can live with having this person in your group, and maybe you can't. It's going to be your call as a group, and I can't make that call for you. But ultimately, express your desires as honestly as possible. Make sure you hear other people's desires, and find a way from where you are to where you want to be without compromising the things that make the game, make the conversation with your friends fun and enjoyable for you. Don't compromise that, but recognize that everyone is different and needs different things. And God, I think sometimes half the time when I give advice on the show, I might as well just be talking about relationships in general. So, maybe next week we'll just do boyfriend hours. Anybody got boyfriend problems they want to talk about? You want to talk about your boyfriend? Email me about your boyfriend at www.adam-cole.com/office-hours. All right, our second question revolves around a certain type of player, and as you listen to this question, keep in mind, perhaps, that there are players like this in the world, and maybe you've played with one. I like to call them the pro.
I'm running a 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons game and have DM'd for just over a year. A player with over 10 years experience is using his knowledge to overcome or bypass the hurdles and problems I set for him and the group. While I'm not actively out to kill the group, I have a sense that many of my other players are becoming bored since threat and their player accomplishment is lacking now in the game. But putting them up against high levels of threats would undoubtedly kill everyone else if the experienced player has a streak of bad luck. How do you deal with ever-increasing levels of complexity that player characters add to the game as they gain levels? And do you have any advice for handling a self-confessed game theorist from thwarting the challenges that I as a DM am setting up for the party, given this character's ever-increasing magic power curve?
So, okay. Folks in chat, while this question was running, pointed out that yes, I am this player in some games. This is me. I am the pro in some games. It's a common, I don't want to call it a problem necessarily, but it's a common trope in tabletop games. So as I go into answering this question, keep in mind that this person, that Red Bell, is playing 3.5. So what 3.5 means is the 3.5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, and that there is a massive experience differential, not in character experience, but personal experience. One player has 10 years of experience with this complicated game. So this is actually a really complicated problem because you can't answer it easily. There's no real problem here necessarily. It comes up a lot actually in cooperative board gaming. So if you have ever played Pandemic or Forbidden Island, you've probably seen this happen. One player, this happened actually a lot in 4th edition too, one player, generally the most experienced or skilled player at the table, in an effort to help the team overcome the obstacles of the game and drag that team to victory, is going to overbear the rest of the players, suggesting what they do, working through common problems, being like, oh, when this came up, you need to do this. This is how that works. This is how you solve this problem. And just sort of single player playing everyone else's turn for them. Right? This is yeah, I guess you could buy that, but the optimal choice here is obviously this. Right? This comes up all the time in tabletop games. Less so in role-playing games, but the more mechanically focused and challenge-oriented the game is. The more you have to overcome something in the game by way of considerable mechanisms in that game. So the thing is, a game like 3.5, D&D, or Pathfinder is sort of the perfect storm for this issue to come up, this sort of imbalance, because they're intensely dense rules-wise, right? Pathfinder is huge. 3.5, similarly, lots of stuff goes into that game, lots of rules, lots of additional supplements, and it's incredibly, incredibly challenge-oriented, right? You have to beat the obstacles the game sets in front of you to advance, to win at 3.5. This is true of every version of D&D, but it's especially true as part of this problem in 3.5 and Pathfinder. So the other thing is that it rewards player knowledge over character skill. Basically, you're going to max out your mechanistic efficiency as a character, but you'll never max out how good you are at Pathfinder, right? You'll know what choices to make your character the best possible character, and if you're not making those choices, you're playing the game suboptimally. And if you've ever watched me talk about games in any situation, if there's an optimal way to play the game, which is to say an optimal way to get from not having the goal of your character to having the goal of your character, and you're playing any other way, technically by the rules of the game, you are playing it wrong. There is a right way to play Pathfinder and 3.5 D&D, for example, according to the mechanics. The fluff of the game, the GM advice of the game will tell you otherwise, but if there is a goal to go after, and there are tools to use to go after that goal, you have to pick the most optimal tool in engaging that goal, or you're playing the game wrong. You're not playing it in good faith. So the thing here is, this is the thing where, as a person plays a game like that, whether it's Pathfinder or 3.5 or Magic the Gathering or Warhammer or whatever, they develop skills for future play. Your first 3.5 character is going to almost always be either a total throwaway, or you're going to get someone pinch hitting for you. They're going to help you make your character. They're going to pandemic their way through it and be like, here you go. It's a whatever goblin gunslinger with some insane collection of feats that makes you perfect. Don't fuck this up, and check with me every time you level, right? And that's the sort of secret sauce that poisons the whole thing at the table. If you're a new player, you're more than likely going to be a liability to the rest of the group. It's not your fault. You're just not good at the game yet. And being bad at the game is fine initially, but the game expects you, and more experienced players expect you to get better. I call this you can call this the paintball scenario. If you've ever played paintball with a mixed group, it comes up in a lot of things like this. True Dungeon at Gen Con is an event that runs into this problem, where there are two kinds of paintball players. There's the weekend warriors who are like, I bought my own custom paintball gear, I have a special gun, I have all my own paintballs, I have a team that I'm on. You know, you're in this situation where you are dedicated to this thing, and you go to play at the paintball range, and you get paired up with the other kind of player who's just the filthy casual, who shows up in jeans and a t-shirt with a rented gun and buys paintballs by the bag from the paintball place. And the pros who get matched up with these other players can be really frustrated by losing games because they're very competitive. It happens across the board in any competitive situation. The weird thing about this question, about Red Bell's question, is that it's an inverse situation to that, in that everyone is a noob except this one player who has all this experience and knows how to play to win, versus a group of players who are still figuring things out. And it's especially tricky because in a board game, this shit's not so bad, because the competition aims itself as a set of mechanisms and random elements, the game itself. In Pandemic, it's not me and you and her against them, it's all of us against the designers. And so you're learning together, you're cooperative, you're working as a team. But in a tabletop RPG like 3.5, fundamentally you're competing with another player who's using those rules against you. They're creating a situation in which you need to overcome that person's skill at implementing encounters, traps, and monsters. And it sounds like this player, this 10-year experienced player, is kind of taking Red Bell to town. Because it's really hard to GM for someone who's way better at a game than you, and your job is to create challenge. And that's where player skill comes in. So player skill is about knowing what roles to make when, what abilities to choose to overcome difficult challenges to make those roles easier, and how to leverage 400 plus pages of rules that the game gives you in the best possible way. You know, it's to know why Channel Fireball is such a good thing to do. It's why knowing when to mulligan and when not to, right? It's about knowing what skills are useful, what feats are useful, what classes and races go together, because you've played before. And what's important to recognize here is that none of this is a player-facing problem. This is almost the opposite of Primarch's problem, in that it's very, very much about the game you're playing. This person, this 10-year experienced veteran, the pro in your game, person making all these mechanically optimal choices, they're doing what the game demands, and they're playing correctly. In effect, they're winning at Dungeons and Dragons. And that's okay. That's their job. They're using their knowledge of the game to beat you. And this is why games like this are so frustrating for me, because winning in this case is a condition of direct character victory, not a condition of making the game more fun, right? Winning at D&D doesn't make the game more fun for anybody else. You don't get XP for reincorporation. You don't get XP for saying, oh, yes, and in 3.5, right? You don't get XP for fucking playing your character. I'm going to do it. Here it comes. I'm saying it. I'm going to say it. Burning Wheel does this. Burning Wheel does player skill that as you get better at Burning Wheel, you make the game more fun for everyone else. And Burning Wheel's not the only game. There are a lot of games that the better you get at them, because of their reward structure, make the game more fun for everyone else at the table, right? Knowing what skills to highlight in Apocalypse World Just that little bit of game knowledge can make the game more fun for everybody else. Making choices in a game like that is not about optimal gameplay. It's about optimal immersion and enjoyment of the narrative. So the thing is, without a lot of time and practice, you're never just going to get better than this player at 3.5. Like, I'm sorry, that's just how it is. Like, you'll never get better than them without spending 10 years or whatever, or hyper focusing on learning the game. They've got a leg up on you, and for this campaign, it might just be insurmountable. So what's my advice? I mean, okay, talk to them first and foremost, because right now we might have this idea of your 10-year player as kind of an asshole, right? Kind of a self-involved jerk, kind of somebody who just wants to win. I got a lot of flack for this when I was playing West Marches as Grigori, because people were like, why aren't you playing, you're metagaming, why are you playing to win? Why are you not playing to have fun? And, I had conversations with other players about like, hey, so my priority as a player here is to make sure we all do good at D&D, but I also want to like highlight your story, and that's how all the stuff with Galahad came up, because my goal with that game was to highlight other players' stuff, to give them opportunities, because like Sam was always really interested in having his character fall from grace, and I was like, cool man, I can help you do that while we are also kicking the shit out of Dungeons and Dragons. So having a conversation about that and acknowledging that, like, okay buddy, yeah, you're really good at D&D and you're kicking my ass, but it's making the game boring for everybody. Make that clear. Right? Ask them to consider either playing with a different group whose skill level better matches their own. Like, man, you are getting, the matchmaking here is all fucked up, right? Like, you're a level 50 guy and we're level 1s, and how did you get put in our party to begin with? This is not balanced, right? Tell them that. Acknowledge it. Bring it out in the open, because they might just think like, no way, I'm having a great time. I'm kicking your ass. It's fun. But telling them that, like, not everybody else is having fun, acknowledging that maybe they want to play with somebody whose skill level better matches. Their MMR is all fucked up. Or, hey, maybe you want to DM, right? You got all this knowledge. Maybe you want to run the game for us, and you can teach us how to get good, right? You can show us how to play the game. And that's certainly an option. But you run the risk of them turning into an evil GM in that case, because some GMs... I'm going to tell you a story about how I tried to learn how to play Warhammer 40k. So I made a choice to play the Black Templars, because I thought their armor was cool. I like the paint scheme. I like the monochrome thing. I made myself a little Black Templar army, painted them all up, and I went with a friend of mine to a local game store where he promised, he was like, I will teach you how to play Warhammer now. I will totally show you. He had a demon army, and he was like, all right, let's play. So we like got set up, played the game, and he just fucking kicked the shit out of me. Just like wiped the floor with me. Just completely destroyed me, and was like, yep, that's Warhammer. And I was like, what? What the fuck, man? I didn't learn anything. You just killed me. You didn't explain any of the rules. You just stepped on my face. And he was like, sorry, man, we're playing Warhammer. You gotta suffer to get good. Fuck that attitude, and be aware that this GM, hopefully you're not playing with assholes, Red Bell, but hopefully this GM won't do that to you if you turn over the reins to them. It's an option, but just be careful, because sometimes people with power and experience can be assholes about it. Alternatively, ask this person, and this is the one that takes a lot more, personal energy and self-awareness. You can ask this person to take a back seat and stop being so fucking aggressive, right? You can ask them to mentor the other players, play a character that's less optimal, right? If they can bear to play something shitty and not win, you can change the way that they approach the game and give them a personal reward structure that isn't about the game, right? If they're a good person, maybe they're going to be able to spotlight other players and say, your new reward structure is not going to be winning this game, it's going to be helping other people win. Turn them from a player to a coach. Turn them from a rapper to a producer. Let them take a mentorship role and spotlight and train the other players. Make the new generation of 3.5 players, right? Hopefully that's a role that they can take on. But remember, if you do this, you are literally asking them to throw the game. You are saying, please lose at Dungeons and Dragons, and fuck, that's hard advice to give. I don't know if I could do that. I tried my best. You can watch me do this in West Marches. I tried my best to teach the other players how to play by choosing a non-aggressive character type, right? I chose a support class, and I tried to help everyone make optimal decisions, but you can watch me. You can watch my little heart fucking break over and over when players make suboptimal choices and I have to swallow my pride and let them endanger the group. It didn't go great for me every time, right? There's points in the West Marches where I definitely come across as kind of a douche. I will like readily acknowledge that, and that's just me being kind of aggressive about playing Dungeons and Dragons and really wanting to win. And like, I get that. It's a thing that I struggled with in that campaign. Because asking a person to play any less than their full maximum capacity is asking them to do something frustrating. So keep that in mind, that's a risk. And the whole thing about this, Red Bell, is that it's not your fault, right? This isn't a failing of you for not being good at the game. Anyone who tells you that the response to this is to get better at Pathfinder or get better at 3.5, they're not okay. That's a lie. It's not your fault. This is just how the game works. And it's really annoying, and it's the reason, or one of many reasons, why I just refuse to play in that branch of Dungeons and Dragons. I won't go out on that limb, because no thank you. I'm not into it. So I think the thing is here is talk to that player, see if they're willing to cool their fucking jets for a minute for the sake of the campaign, or give them the reins and let them run it for a while to teach you all their evil tricks, because GMing is in so many ways still an oral tradition. Make sure the game is still a good fit for everyone and go from there. Right? If you're stuck on playing 3.5, and I'm not going to suggest you play something else, because that's... Okay, you know what I am going to suggest? Try playing something else that everyone is new to, because that might help. It seems obvious to me, but try it out, right? Like, maybe that works. The point here is that if you want to get good at 3.5, you want to become this person in the future, it's just going to take time and practice. And maybe playing with a pro like this isn't the best way to get to that point. That's my thought. Depends on how passionate, how much desire you have to be good at this particular game. So speaking of desire, of love, this is a question that I think is really interesting, because it's about love for a genre, and that genre not being reflected in role-playing games in a very loving way.
Hi, Adam. My name is Brian, and I go by Mixalide on various forums. I love science fiction settings in all forms of media, movies, TV, books, games, whatever. But I have found running science fiction settings in RPGs to be very complex and overwhelming. You typically have all the stuff that you would have in a fantasy RPG for combat and social things, etc., and various types of conflict. But plus you have more technology, vehicles, weapons, planets, societies, spaceships, and all sorts of extra stuff in there. Just more of everything. It's a lot to keep track of and a lot to prep for. Do you have any tips on running science fiction games to keep the maintenance lower, or suggestions on particular games to try? I've watched you run multiple science fiction games, so I'm sure you have great things to say.
Well, thank you for your faith in me, Mixalide. Yeah, I mean, I love sci-fi. Sci-fi is my favorite. Sci-fi is definitely my favorite kind of game to run. I think you can do some pretty amazing stuff with science fiction. Science fiction explores the world in a way fantasy doesn't, right? Fantasy is escapist in a way that I think sci-fi isn't. And for me, RPGs can be a way to explore like real life issues, and sci-fi makes it easy for us to do that in a lot of ways. However, science fiction games are complicated as fuck most of the time, and you can blame Traveller for that. Well, okay, so that's not maybe strictly fair, because Metamorphosis Alpha came first, but isn't really the hard sci-fi shitshow that Traveller was. But what I'm trying to point out here is that the complexity of rules and the sci-fi setting have been BFFs for ages. Like way back when our first role-playing games were coming out, Traveller is the first like really popular science fiction role-playing game, and it is complicated as shit. There's like acceleration and deceleration tables, and there's all kinds of like complex stuff there that you have to, as a GM, figure out. And I think the reason for this is that while we don't have physical sciences in real life that deal with like, you know, airspeed velocity of a dragon, we can figure out how space engines and laser turrets might actually work in theory. It's much easier. We don't have magic to account for. I mean, sometimes we have like psionics or whatever, but generally science fiction doesn't have to account for hand wavy shit, and so focuses in on the specific stuff. As nerds, we have a history of trying to model our science fiction role-playing games after these more realistic tools of science that we have available to us. We want our fiction to feel scientific. And so the other thing that happens most of the time when we try to create congruence between the fiction at the table and the rules that produce that fiction, we create these mechanical monsters to invoke the media that we are emulating, right? Science fiction is all supposed to be blinking lights and hyperdrives and tech talk and black holes and event horizons and science and shit. So we create role-playing games whose rules feel like that as well. We want our games to feel like they require a calculator, because using a calculator to figure that shit out makes it feel more science fictional. There's a degree of, it's not skeuomorphism exactly, but rules reflecting the kinds of processes that go into the game are a real thing. This is why, for example, Deadlands uses poker hands for magic. All right? So Deadlands uses poker hands for magic because holding a hand of cards and playing poker to cast your spells feels like an old Wild Westy time thing to do, right? It feels like you are more embodying your character. Mechanisms matter, right? Rules are important in helping us get our head around what our characters would think or feel or do. So by that token, a lot of sci-fi games, I think, lean on the idea that we have to tell these science fiction stories using these complicated tools, when really some people just want to tell stories about space. We want our narratives to be about space and not use a role-playing game to like solve the 3-body problem or calculate albedo or whatever. And I agree with your point, I think, that you were trying to make about role-playing games, sci-fi role-playing games being a lot more stringent on the GM than, say, fantasy, for example, or even urban fantasy, in that in Dungeons & Dragons, you can wave your hand and declare anything that might make more narrative sense than realistic sense to be the providence of the gods, or a wizard, or fucking elves did it, or whatever, right? It doesn't matter. You can just wave your hands and say, oh, the gravity in this place is changed because magic. But in a science fiction game, unless you're playing a science fantasy game like Star Wars, which is essentially... It's fantasy. It's fantasy with spaceships. You're going to get hit with more questions about gravity, vacuum, environment stuff, atmosphere, like just bullshit that your players might expect a specific answer about, and that you might, by the game, be expected to remember the rules for. There's a lot more modeling of stuff that in a fantasy game we just take for granted, right? In a fantasy game, no one is going to ask you why magic works the way that it works and expect a scientific answer. No one will naysay you if you're just like, I don't know, necro wizards did it. That's why it's, minus 30 degrees in the middle of this tropical zone. Fuck off. But if you're like, it's really cold here and you don't have some other reason to explain it, you have to use like science, which is like half of science fiction altogether. It's nuts. So what you can do, if having to remember all this sciencey stuff, and if the rules are bogging you down or whatever, because maybe, you wouldn't ask this question if you liked high maintenance, high complicated games. What you might want to do is look for a game that focuses on the kinds of fiction that science fiction, like just small font that science part, and look at the fiction part, right? Focus on games that look at the kinds of stories you're telling with sci-fi rather than like a tabletop simulation of outer space. Look for a game that uses science fiction as a backdrop, not a framework or a straitjacket. So depending on your group, depending on your desires as a GM, you might want to go with a bunch of different games. I can handle giving you some general suggestions, but like, for example, if you want to go with a game that still has kind of a hardish sci-fi feel, but uses a very basic rules framework with a lot of room for you to hack and build your own stuff, start with Stars Without Number. It basically just uses, it has combat rules, and it has a bunch of random tables for generating star systems and stuff, but not really much else. It asks you to fill in the blank. So if you're a budding designer or you're comfortable making up your own shit, Stars Without Number is a good choice. But if that's too mechanical for you, if you don't want to make that stuff up, you might want to play a game that's set in space, but isn't about being set in space necessarily. It's really, say, like a pulpy adventure game. If you want a pulpy adventure game that you can coincidentally set in space, and this is leaning into the Star Wars territory, you could start with Fate, right? Fate's not a bad idea in that case because Fate abstracts everything into the same core elements, right? Everything about Fate basically boils down to a few different things, right? Aspects predominantly. So this way, things like spaceships and mutants and alien civilizations and planets, you can just build them the same way characters do. Just throw some aspects down about this planet and then use your fate points to hit on them and bring them up in the narrative. So if you want to focus on a planet whose core shit is icy atmosphere, race war, and hierarchies, right? Social hierarchy. Make those the aspects of the planet and allow them to be taggable as you play the game. You don't even need a space supplement to play Fate Core as a sci-fi game. I'm not the hugest fan of Fate, like, generally, but I think if you come at it knowing what it is, predominantly a pulpy, aspect-driven, slightly more mechanical than it looks game, and if you can buy into that, then try it. Try Fate, right? If you are looking for a specific kind of science fiction, like, say, cyberpunk, you could play a game like The Sprawl, which is a game about creating narratives that feel like mission-driven cyberpunk. It's a science fiction game that doesn't care about the kinds of details most sci-fi games lean on, but focuses on the themes. It focuses on the vibe of that particular kind of sci-fi. Essentially, I think what you're going to need to do here is get more specific with yourself. Now, you tell us all that you love science fiction, which I believe you. I believe that you love all kinds of science fiction, but you can't play them all at once, so let's get specific. Let's talk about the kinds of sci-fi you love and why. Do you like the utopian dream of Star Trek? Do you like gritty, close-to-earth political sci-fi like The Expanse? Do you like the transhuman majesty of the Culture series? Find what you really love and then crack that shell open and get to the meat inside, right? What do you love about that thing? Is it the setting? Do you love envisioning the idea that you could travel from one end of the galaxy to the other in a matter of days, that you could visit an ice planet in the morning and a desert planet at night, and that each one would be its own separate, interesting culture? Is it about the landscapes? Is it about the images you get in your mind, the places and people that the characters will interact with? Is it about the themes? Right? Do you love Dune not because you like giant worms and space knife fights, but because you like the idea of exploring ecology? Is it about fundamental fuel scarcity that makes Dune interesting to you? Right? Do you love cyberpunk because, like me, you think it's cool that it focuses on class disparity and the fight against supercapitalism and the idea that man and machine will merge and both will change forever? Right? Like, what about it makes you get excited? What is your moment of desire for that? What's your spark? So find that spark, dig deep, right? Get in there, get to know what you love about the kind of science fiction you want to play as a game, and find a game that will tell those stories with you. Find a game that focuses on the same shit you do, and then just fucking play the hell out of it. And this is why game recommendation questions are hard, and they get harder every day, because new games, some of them awesome, come out constantly that do cool, focused, new things. So take my usual advice on this, sci-fi or otherwise, and get to know yourself. Get to know what you love about that media. Feel your desire in that space, and try out, or at least read, a bunch of games to see what you think. And I'm gonna put this right out on the table, that I get that me, as a person who games for a living, who obviously, like, owns a lot of role-playing games, who's published a role-playing game, I have the budget and the privilege to say shit like, just read a bunch of games. Just, like, get your hands on a bunch of games, and just read them and play them. But I understand that's a pretty privileged thing to say, and I will say this, that there are ways to play games or experience games that don't require you paying for them, but I get that that's harder to do, that there's some stuff there. So I think the easiest way you can do this is ask questions of people. You're on the right track, right? Ask questions of people about not necessarily what they would recommend, but their experiences with certain games. Find a community of people that will talk to you about role-playing games that you jive with, that makes sense to you, and sap their energy. Find out what they love and see if any of that matches up with what you love. And if you really want a list just to review, depending on the kind of sci-fi you like, at least read the back cover, quote unquote, of these games, right? This would be my sci-fi top 6 right now. Obviously this will change in time, but if you want to get like a good broad kind of experience with these things, check out Traveller. It's complex. Like, go for first edition. Don't the Mongoose stuff, not 5th edition. Go all the way back, read Traveller. Figure out where sci-fi's RPG roots came from. Traveller is cool in that also, as just from a game design perspective, it's the only role-playing game that I can think of that you can solo play. Seriously, you can play a campaign of Traveller by yourself, which is kind of weird. So go check out Traveller. If you want to compare and contrast, immediately look at Stars Without Number after Traveller, because Stars Without Number is Traveller through another lens. Check out Microscope. Microscope is almost always a sci-fi game when I play it. I've almost never played Microscope as a fantasy game. Because it's me. That's how I play games. But try doing a sci-fi game with Microscope. It's really fun. You can explore that kind of The Foundation, the Ian M. Banks novels, like culture building stuff in Microscope. That might scratch that itch for you. If you want something incredibly granular, if you want something that's just like hyper setting focused and just a mechanical beast, check out Burning Empires. It's available as a PDF. You can't get the print version anymore. But yeah, Burning Empires, check it out. It's the only Burning Wheel Headquarters game that I am still not confident enough to run. Like, it's still it's daunting as fuck to me, but maybe you'll be into it. As far as the Powered by the Apocalypse stuff goes, there's kind of a void of like generic sci-fi, which I think speaks to the Powered by the Apocalypse engine and its need for specificity. But check out the Sprawl if sci-fi is interesting to you. You can repurpose the Sprawl not to be about like a small case thing. You can blow it up. You can go to other planets and stuff. You can make it a little more sci-fi if you want. You could very easily hack that to add a spaceship and make them a crew of a ship. Check out, if you want to explore the social issues of sci-fi, you can check out a game called Shock. I've played it a couple of times. I probably wouldn't play it again, but as this is the case with so many of these like small press games, I really enjoyed them once and then never really played them again. Because they're interesting experiments, but maybe not. Whatever. I'm not gonna prejudge. Try finding a copy of Shock. Check that out. And if you want to play Fate, you can either just look at Fate Core in and of itself, or there are a few sci-fi games. I haven't played them, but I've read both of them. The Eclipse Fate. This takes the setting of Eclipse Phase and applies it to the Fate system. So that might work for you. And then Mindjammer, which is another like post-human sci-fi. The book is huge. Yeah. So check that out. Those are some Fate games you might enjoy. And honestly, like I'm not. There's more games in the world, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your poor little GM's brain. So if you, and by you I mean people in Twitch chat or folks commenting on YouTube, if you've got a sci-fi game that you love, let us know. Right? Comment, talk about it in the chat, talk about it on the Discord. Let's all find a game that Mixelide will enjoy. And maybe in the process, we can share some cool games with each other. So tell us the name of your favorite sci-fi game and why you love it. What does it do that tells sci-fi stories in a way that really like twigs for you, that really like gets you going? Share that desire, share that passion, because that's how we get exposed to cool new stuff. So thanks for coming. This has been episode number 20 of Office Hours. As always, if you want to get involved, if you have burning questions that you want to ask GM Adam, you can submit them at www.adam-koebel.com. Click that Office Hours link, fill out the form, and we'll be back next week, episode 21, 3 more questions. Thanks for coming, everybody. See you next time.